Welcome back to class, everybody. It's a bloody sandy day in the neighborhood, and for once the weather in here matches the weather outside, and I'm loving it. Alright, let's get going right along. Today we're going to be teaching the basics of bladed weaponry. And by that I mean which weapons you'd like to chop with more, which weapons you'd like to slash with more, the difference between a slashing and chopping strike, and the effects of slashing and chopping strikes. We're going to start with chopping, since it's probably most people's attempt to cut somebody. Chopping strikes, like ones that would be done with a straight bladed weapon or a inverted bladed weapon, are ones that come straight in on the body. They just thunk in. Let's get ourselves a good example here. Boop. I need a volunteer. So chopping, just straight in on the body, no ulterior motion. Bing. Bam. A chopping motion conveys all the force of your strike into your opponent straight up. Oh, that's nasty. I forgot how nasty the faults could be. So what it does is it inflicts a deeper cut, but the cut is only as wide as usually the surface you're cutting into. So like if I chop, somebody on, say, the shoulder, that cut is only going to be as wide as the shoulder. But it could be as deep as I can drive that blade. So chops are a lot more about your strength than anything else, which is why they were favored by, like, say, axes. If you need to chop something, an axe is your go-to one-stop shop for chop. The Norse loved their axes, and they loved chopping, because, like, if I have to get through chainmail, a slash will not do. Not unless my sword is some sort of ungodly sharp. A chop, on the other hand, will crack right through that chainmail, or at least drive it enough into the body to inflict damage on the bones underneath. So chopping was definitely a hard hit. Next up is slashing, and there is no better slashing weapon that I can think of than one of these. This is all they do all day. I mean, to be fair, I could think of a few more. As I've said before, Japanese weaponry get a lot of guff for like a lot, not a lot of guff, a lot of praise for what they did right, to the point of being mythological. But it's still a great sword. I'm never gonna say it's not a great sword. It is a great sword. So we're gonna get right along. Slashing weaponry, you don't want to thunk into your opponent. You want to keep an angle to the blade and go across your opponent. So here's our opponent. He swings. See my blade follow through. Those through strikes allow the blade to slide across his body. Damn! That ability to slide across the body creates either a deeper cut by driving in the same area, but instead of just hitting, you're putting the whole length of the blade on that same area. Or if you hit someone across the chest, you're going across their entire chest, while a chopping weapon would usually stop wherever it first hit. So slashing weapons inflict longer cuts. They can inflict deeper cuts as well, if, like, say, as I hit him in the shoulder, and he no longer has a shoulder. There you go. Now, hold on, I'm going to see if I can... Ha! Nope. Darn. Oh. So yeah, slashing weapons you draw across the body. You don't want to hold them straight out like you would a chopping weapon, because it's going to hit and it's not going to slide a lot, which is the benefit of slashing weaponry. You hit at an angle and let the length of the blade go through your opponent. Nope, hold on. So there are a few one-handed, because those are both two-handed weaponry. There are a few one-handed that do both sides of this argument correct. As I've said, axes. Axes are a great chopping weapon, but there is another. We're going to go here to Nordic tab. The Sikhs, a fantastic chopping weapon. As you can see, it doesn't have any kind of curve to its blade, meaning all that force is coming in. Now, the Norse wore hauberks. Hauberks were thicker rings, like larger ringed chainmail. They had to get through that chainmail. They had two ways of doing that. The spjot and bodkin arrows that could pierce. The spjot, for those of you who forgot, is, wow, this scroll's really slow. The spjot, which is their spear, or their bodkin arrows, which sadly weren't put in the Norse tab. Those are still here in the ranged tab. Nope. There we go. Bodkin arrows. Or they would use chopping weapons like axes, seekses, even the classic Ulfbert sword. As you can see, not a great taper. A chopping weapon. Right here. A Viking Age sword that excels in chopping, because that would crack that chainmail, crack that hauberk, and do damage into the body beneath it. On the other side of the world, people who wore padded armor more because, you know, they didn't have as much metal, places like the Middle East, they had a much more expertise in slashing weaponry. Things like the kilij or the shashmir, which they are famous for. The Greeks also had a few, the Indians had a few. This is a hewing weapon, which is another form of chopping. To hew something is to chop it. By its inverse curve, it puts all that weight at the front. The Greeks were one of the few to do both, and I thought that was hilarious. The Greeks have both a chopping weapon. If I go down here to storage, they have the Makaria, which is a chopping weapon and a slicing weapon. They also have the Falcata, all chop all day, and nope. And the Xiphus, which, due to that bell, chopping and slicing weapon. So they did both, and they did both really well. So there are some one-handed form weapons that can do both. My favorite form of slicing weaponry is actually cutlasses. And I know what you're thinking, but Jake, cutlasses were thick and heavy. They were probably used for chopping. Well, much like the hunting swords of yore, these were, yes, they could chop. Anything can chop. But a lot of times these swords are curved, and that curve increases their slicing power. See, like this raiding scimitar that looks like a classic cutlass, you know, a classic saber. The naval cutlass doesn't have the greatest curve to it. You're all chop all day because of how massive your blade is. You are just wham bam, thank you, ma'am. So yeah, there's some good ones. I like the cutlass for its slicing power over any of its other features. Let me just find a good one. Ooh, here's a great slicing weapon. I've used this thing to take entire limbs off. The good curve of the blade allows it to come through and in really good. It doesn't have much of a handguard, so definitely not a defensive weapon, and most curved swords were not defensive weapons. Even though this one has a handguard, I would not trust. I mean, it has this bit here where you can see it's visibly not sharpened for its blocking, but I would not trust a curved weapon to block anything. You'd more or less parry with the flat side of the blade to parry the strike to the side and then come through. And let's actually see if I can't get somebody to do that. Let's see if I can't get a parry up. Oh, she got my hand. I went to slap it to the side. Let's try this again. Oh, see, bad edge alignment. I had bad edge alignment. I hit her with the side. See, I'm using the flat of the sword. I'm not turning it out. Alright, that's enough of you. As you can see, spurting blood, good slice across the throat. So, the parrying's a bit difficult, but as you can see, all my blocks, I kept the blade facing her, and I blocked with the flat. That way it wouldn't damage my blade. On the first parry I tried to get, she hit me right in the nuts. That sucks. So yeah, great sword for its slicing potential. As you can see, it one and under. But on that first strike, I had terrible edge alignment, and I hit her with the flat of the blade, and it did nothing. So, edge alignment is incredibly important, especially if you're using a two-sided weapon like my Annalise here, which is a chopper all day, every day. But because of its taper, allows for a technique called a draw slice, where you chop and then draw the blade across their body to drive the cut a little deeper. So they come in, I hit, and then ching, and draw it across the face to do a bit more damage. Another thing about edge alignment, if I know where the front blade of my sword is, I know where the back is. And on a double-bladed sword, you can hook like that. You can come through and back. Oh! Bam! Chopping sword! Wow, really? The dirt saved your life? Stay down. And then draw. I caught her sword and I punched her in the nose. So yeah, that is the very, very bare minimum basics of bladed combat. Chopping for swords that are meant for chopping, like straight swords, like the long swords, other knight swords. Slashing strikes for things like the katana and other Asian and Middle Eastern weaponry. And use slashing weapons on things like leather armor, brigandines, stuff that could be sliced, and use chopping motions on things like chainmail, scale mail, stuff like that, where a slice wouldn't get through. I would not use a chop on a brigandine, which is like layers. You know what? Here's a photo. Thank you. I also wouldn't use it on a gambeson. Another photo. Thank you. Those are both very thick armor. The reason I wouldn't use a chop on them is because in the gambeson's case, it's layers and layers and layers of cloth. That chop isn't going to chop through them. It's just going to compress them. Might cut through the first few layers. But if I want to get all the way through a gambeson, I need a slicing or a piercing motion. Something like a katana will be able to cut through all those layers much more efficiently because it's slicing them one layer at a time throughout the length of the blade. So yeah, that's the basics. My next episode will be blunt weapon basics. So stay tuned, and class dismissed.